Welcome to the deep dive. We all want to learn new stuff, right? Like get smarter faster, but without, feeling completely overwhelmed. So today, we're going to tackle something that I think is relevant to, well, pretty much everyone. How to find genuine inner peace and freedom. We've been exploring this really fascinating guide called A2, which you can kind of think of as practicing not wanting.
Yeah, exactly. And when we say not wanting, we're not just talking about decluttering your closet or anything, although, that's definitely part of it. This guide goes way deeper. It dives into this concept of what it calls spiritual entropy. It also explores the power of living, well, a more minimalist life and understanding the difference between just a quick hit of pleasure and true lasting happiness, being mindful of what we consume, all that good stuff.
Yeah.
And it even gives you a bunch of really practical ways to declutter. Everything from your physical space to, all that mental chatter going on in your head.
So think of this a deep dive as like an express ticket, right? When we've gone through everything, we've kind of distilled it down to bring you, the core insights, the key takeaways, the practical stuff you can actually use. And our goal here is really simple, to help you, the listener, shift from that constant chasing after more, to finding a real sense of freedom in, letting go of the stuff that's not really serving you.
And that's really at the core of this guide. It's arguing that by consciously releasing what you don't need, both the physical stuff around you and that inner noise, you can create space for genuine inner peace and get back that most valuable resource, your time. So are you ready to dive in?
Absolutely. Let's start with a super basic question that the book poses right up front. Does having more stuff, more possessions actually make you happier? It brings up this idea that even if, on the outside everything looks picture perfect, on the inside, we can be kind of a mess, what they call spiritual entropy.
I love that term, spiritual entropy. Think of it as like this invisible drag on your system, right? This thing that slows you down, even when externally everything seems fine. And the book actually uses a really helpful image here, a neglected house. Things start to break down over time, clutter builds up, and eventually it just starts to feel like a burden. Or imagine a computer. A computer with way too many files and programs running. It just starts to, grind to a halt. So it's the same idea with our inner world. When we don't manage it, we get mental clutter, emotional stress, and, it can lead to a real slump in motivation.
And the book actually contrasts this whole spiritual entropy thing with that amazing feeling of flow, when you're so absorbed in something that, everything just clicks. And it's making the point that when your inner world is chaotic, it's just so much harder to get into that flow state. And, building on this idea of inner chaos, the book then talks about willpower, the power of willpower.
Yeah, and this is where it gets super interesting. The book uses this analogy of carbon atoms. So you've got these atoms. They can arrange themselves as graphite, right? In a pencil, which is, pretty easy to break. Or they can form a diamond, which is incredibly strong. So same basic element, totally different structure, totally different strength. And I think the key takeaway here is that inner order, it's not just about, feeling good. It's actually the structure that makes your willpower unbreakable. It's the difference between that graphite and that diamond. So when we're internally disorganized, our willpower is weak. But cultivating inner order makes it resilient. The book actually mentions 5 forces that contribute to this inner strength. But, for now, let's just stick with this core idea of order.
And this all circles back to minimalism, right? The book makes a pretty compelling case that by actually letting go, whether it's, physical possessions or all those commitments that are clogging up your calendar, or even just those nagging thought patterns, you can actually unlock a deeper sense of happiness and, feel way more in control of your life. There's even this, the book uses this term, it means homework or practice, to emphasize that these aren't just ideas to think about, but things you actually have to, engage with. So there's this view of trying to gain by letting go, which sounds kind of backwards, but it's all about the space you create when you declutter.
Exactly. And I think to really grasp this idea, the book makes this crucial distinction between fleeting pleasure or, that quick hit of enjoyment and lasting happiness, a much deeper, more sustained state of being. And it explains the pleasure is often tied to our immediate desires. And desires, they have this built-in mechanism where, you get a little taste and it just makes you crave more and more in this never-ending cycle that never really satisfies.
Right. It just makes sense when you think about how our brain's reward system works. The book explains that happiness, neurologically speaking, comes from the anticipation and fulfillment of expectations.
Yeah.
Which releases dopamine. So yeah, we get that initial hit from dopamine. But our brains, they're smart, they adapt quickly. And they start needing more and more to get that same feeling, which is why, chasing after external pleasure can sometimes feel like running on a treadmill. It's like you never actually get anywhere. The book even mentions a study of Nobel Prize winners. And, their overall happiness levels didn't necessarily jump after they won. So that really makes you think about what we're all chasing.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And this leads to what I think is a really critical point. The book's argument that true happiness, well, it's not about constantly seeking those external thrills. It's really about managing your inner world. It's about learning to tame those inner cravings. They call them greed, anger, and delusion, instead of constantly giving in to them. And there's a story in the book about someone who finally bought their dream house, like the one they'd always wanted. And as soon as they moved in, they immediately started wanting like a bigger, better one. It perfectly illustrates that that endless cycle of desire, always wanting more, never really being satisfied.
Which brings us to the trap of consumerism. The book argues that our society, well, it's kind of built this powerful but often invisible belief that happiness comes from buying and owning things.
Mm-hmm.
It even digs up this crazy historical example, a jingle from, I think, the 1950s in America that literally just repeated the phrase buy, 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 like 70 times in a row on one radio station every single day. It just goes to show how deeply ingrained this message has become in our culture, right? It's like everywhere.
Oh, yeah. And it's only gotten worse today. The book points out how advertising, it's everywhere, subtly and not so subtly telling us we need more to be happy, more to be attractive, more to have a good life. And then there's how easy it is to actually consume things. You've got apps that make buying things effortless, online lending that offers, instant gratification, even if you don't have the cash on hand. And the book has this example of someone who impulsively signed up for like a ton of fitness classes online. The ease of buying those classes didn't actually guarantee that they were going to, become healthier or happier. It just made it easy to spend money.
Exactly. And, all this messaging, it just reinforces the idea that owning equals happiness, which the book totally disagrees with. It makes a really strong case that true inner happiness is an internal experience. It's not something you can just, buy off of shelves or order online. There's even another C here, a minimalist physical and mental cleanup assessment. It's this invitation to take a hard look at what you're holding on to, both in your space and, in your mind. What thoughts are you holding on to? What beliefs?
And to give you a sense of where you're at right now, the book even includes a self-assessment quiz to kind of gauge your current level of orderliness. It asks you a bunch of questions, and based on your total score, it goes from 0 to 60. You get an interpretation. So it can tell you if you're super organized and basically a model for everyone else, or if your life is in total chaos and needs some serious attention.
So that's a good starting point. But we've talked about the problem, right? This whole illusion that more equals happiness and the chaos that can, bubble up when we have all these unchecked desires. So where do we go from here? What can we actually do about it?
Well, that's what part 2 of the book is all about. Practical strategies for creating a happier and simpler life. And it kicks off with a really interesting idea that our external environment often mirrors our internal state.
Oh, that makes sense. Like if your desk is a mess, your mind is probably racing too.
Exactly. So the book suggests that decluttering, it should actually begin with our physical surroundings. The idea is that by making our external space more visually appealing, more organized, we start to cultivate this sense of calm and control that can then, work its way inwards.
So it's more than just like tidying up, right? It's about shifting your mindset.
Right. The book really emphasizes this crucial step of releasing our attachments and the reluctance that we often feel towards letting go of our possessions. So it lays out 6 principles of decluttering. It's like a framework for, this whole process of letting go.
Okay, interesting. And I mean, I know there are tons of decluttering tips out there, but does this book offer anything, new, anything unique?
Definitely. It goes way beyond the basic stuff. It provides some more advanced methods that can really help you confront those emotional connections we often have with our stuff. And, this naturally leads to the challenge of dealing with those really tough to discard items, the ones that are loaded with sentimental value or tied to complicated emotions.
Oh, yeah. I'm thinking of those boxes of old photos or, letters from exes,
right.
That kind of stuff.
Exactly. So the book offers a really practical tool for dealing with this. They call it the shopping cart delay method. It's basically a way to pump the brakes on impulsive buying, you know. It creates a buffer between wanting something and actually buying it. And it gives you, the listener, a chance to really think about whether you truly need this thing or whether it's just going to add, more clutter to your life. Will it really add value in the long run?
That's really smart. So it's like a cooling off period.
Exactly. And, at the heart of this whole process is this concept of letting go, or S, as they say in the book. And the book really dives deep into this, exploring key methods and principles for effectively releasing those items that are no longer serving us. One technique that really stood out to me is the inner source release method.
Okay, that sounds interesting. It sounds like it goes beyond just like tossing things in the trash, right?
Right. It's much more mindful. So the inner source release method is a specific way to say goodbye to those those really hard to discard items. It involves actually connecting with the object on a mental level and using 3 phrases: thank you, sorry, and goodbye. So thank you is about acknowledging the role that the item has played in your life. Sorry is about releasing any emotional baggage or guilt you might feel about letting go of it, recognizing that, maybe you've attached deeper meanings to this thing. And then goodbye is, well, it's the final step, the actual release. And the book suggests a say of actively practicing this method as part of your in, which is that Japanese philosophy of decluttering, getting rid of anything that you don't need, want, or use. It's really about being mindful in your letting go.
Wow. That's a really beautiful way to think about it. And it's not just about our personal stuff, is it? The book also talks about how, this whole decluttering thing can actually have a positive impact on those around us.
Totally. It explores how that positive energy that comes from living a more minimalist, more organized life can really ripple outwards, affecting your family, your colleagues, even your roommates. It even suggests involving them in the process, like decluttering shared spaces together. There's even a serial called the UNU, the black box organizing method, which I think it probably involves like containing and managing shared clutter in a designated area, to minimize its impact on everyone and maybe even inspire others to embrace a bit more simplicity in their own lives.
I love that. Okay, so we've looked at decluttering our physical world, but part 3 of the book, it shifts the focus to something else, the connection between feeling physically lighter and our inner happiness. And it introduces this concept of negative entropy in our diet and lifestyle.
Yeah. This is really fascinating. It's this idea that just like physical clutter can create inner chaos. Well, certain lifestyle choices can actually increase our spiritual entropy, while others can help reduce it, leading to, greater well-being. And the book specifically highlights intermittent fasting, or SOAS, as a way to promote this negative entropy within our bodies.
It's like consciously choosing inputs that revitalize you instead of, drain you.
Exactly. And it also stresses how important it is to align our lives with our natural rhythms when we eat, when we sleep. Contrasts healthy habits with those that increase entropy, like staying up all night, eating poorly. And all of this, it's connected to this practice of mindful observation.
I've heard of that. It's like a form of meditation, right?
Yeah. Yeah, kind of. But in this context, it's about observing your own thoughts and the underlying desires that fuel your actions, but without judgment. It's about becoming a detached observer of like your internal landscape. And when it comes to intermittent fasting, the book actually points out a bunch of potential benefits that go way beyond just, physical health. Things like reduced dependence on food, better sleep, improved mood, clearer thinking, even a boost in creativity and greater work efficiency.
Wow. Those are some pretty impressive claims.
Right. And there's even this really interesting idea that intermittent fasting might even heighten your sense of taste.
Oh, really? How does that work?
Well, the book suggests that by giving your digestive system like these regular breaks, you might become more sensitive to the natural flavors of whole unprocessed foods, and less drawn to those artificial flavors and heavily processed stuff, which really underscores how interconnected our physical and inner states really are.
Okay, that makes sense. Now let's move on to part 4, which dives into managing our attention and our relationships, which I think in today's world, it's a huge challenge for everyone. It feels like our attention is constantly being pulled in a million different directions.
Absolutely. And the book really stresses this need for for conscious attention management, to avoid feeling, totally overwhelmed by this constant barrage of information and distractions. It defines attention as the degree of focus and investment we put into something, and it highlights the unique challenge of managing our attention today. With all these apps on our phones that are specifically designed using tons of data and psychology, like to capture and hold our attention, it's like they're engineered to be addictive.
So how do we even begin to take back control of our attention?
Well, the book talks about attention, where it's like decluttering our attention, and it suggests a few key strategies. The first is to actively remove things that, constantly fragment our attention, like those non-essential apps on our phones, games, endless video scrolling, shopping platforms, things like that. There's actually a great example in the book of someone who deleted all those distracting apps and their phone addiction just like plummeted. It was like they cut up their credit cards to stop overspending.
So it's about removing the temptation. If it's not there, you can't be tempted.
Exactly. And it also talks about decluttering the digital clutter on our devices themselves, getting rid of unnecessary photos and files, old contacts, those social media accounts that just bring negativity into our lives.
Yeah, because that digital clutter, it can definitely contribute to feeling mentally overwhelmed.
Totally. And the book stresses the importance of being more selective about the information we consume, differentiating between like just information and truly valuable information, the stuff that actually contributes to our growth and, helps us understand the world better. It advises us to really streamline our information intake. Be picky about what you let in.
And this leads to that practical advice of, setting no phone times, creating phone-free zones, especially during times when you really need to focus, like work or study, and also in the bedroom.
Oh, yeah. The book is really adamant about keeping technology out of the bedroom. It explains how, having a TV in your bedroom can really mess with your sleep. It suggests finding more relaxing pre-sleep activities instead. And that goes for your phone, too. Try to leave it outside the bedroom.
And another crucial point the book makes is about avoiding multitasking, which, it's often seen as this desirable skill, but the book kind of flips that on its head.
Yeah. It clarifies that while some multitasking might be fine, like if it's mindless stuff like folding laundry while you listen to a podcast. But if you're trying to juggle multiple tasks that require your full attention, well, it actually divides your focus, making you less effective at everything.
So it's about like being more intentional with your focus.
Exactly.
Wow.
And the book then introduces this really powerful concept, heart without obstructions, which I think it's about achieving this like mental freedom.
Like a clear mind.
Exactly. It doesn't mean having, zero tasks or responsibilities. It's more about not being mentally weighed down by them. And the book gives examples of how to achieve this, like addressing those unresolved issues that might be lingering in the back of your mind. Maybe it's offering an apology you've been putting off, or delegating tasks that are, stressing you out, or even just using reminders so you don't have to keep everything in your head all the time.
That reminds me of the concept of bandwidth from the book Scarcity. Have you heard of that?
Mm-hmm. Oh, absolutely. The book actually references Senhil Mullainathan's work on this. It explains how when we experience a scarcity of resources like time or money, it actually reduces our cognitive capacity, our bandwidth, making it harder to, focus on making good decisions and planning for the future. So it really reinforces the idea that by reducing mental clutter, we free up those mental resources and we can think more clearly and, make better decisions overall.
And the book suggests, using tools to help with this, like to-do list apps and, scheduling software, anything to kind of get it out of your head and onto like a physical or digital list.
Right. It's all about externalizing those reminders, those tasks. It also emphasizes the importance of dealing with unfinished business, those lingering things that just drain your energy. The book even shares this really poignant story of a student who was struggling with the loss of a parent, and how, processing that grief was really crucial for him to be able to like focus on the future and move forward in a healthy way.
And speaking of moving forward, the book also briefly mentions the Pomodoro technique as a really helpful method for staying focused and tackling procrastination.
Yeah, it frames procrastination in relation to this idea of spiritual entropy. The less inner chaos you have, the lower your spiritual entropy, the more willpower you have, and the easier it is to actually engage with those tasks. So it offers several strategies to combat procrastination. Things like setting clear goals, visualizing the positive outcomes, tapping into your intrinsic motivation, having like an accountability partner, and rewarding yourself for progress. And it even makes this distinction between, procrastinating on those tasks that have deadlines versus putting off personal growth activities, highlighting how important it is to, address both.
Absolutely. Now let's jump to the last part of the book, part 5, which takes a more forward-looking approach, shifting to a positive mindset and creating a more fulfilling future. And it starts by examining, the root of our worries, like where do they even come from?
And the book's argument here is that those persistent worries and anxieties, they actually originate in our minds, not in external events. And it shares this really relatable story about a friend who is, unemployed and struggling financially. But a lot of his distress actually came from his thoughts about the situation, not necessarily the situation itself. And this leads to this really crucial concept of learning to detach from our thoughts.
Which, I mean, I think is key to finding inner peace. But how do we actually do that? It sounds pretty hard.
Well, the book introduces this idea of the observational self, which is basically about learning to see your thoughts as just thoughts, not getting, totally caught up and controlled by them. It contrasts fusion, which is when you become completely unified with a thought, like thinking I'm a failure, with observation where you can like recognize the thought without judgment. So, I am having the thought that I'm a failure. The book even offers a show for this. It's called the Mirror Observation Release Method. And it's a practical exercise for developing that ability to step back and, observe your thoughts with a bit of detachment.
Okay, that makes sense. Now, the book also talks about simplifying our interpersonal relationships, right? And I think in today's world where we're like constantly connected, that's super relevant.
Yeah, definitely. It points out that, maintaining those relationships that aren't really serving us, the ones that are more draining than nourishing, well, they can really zap our energy. So it stresses the importance of, focusing on those connections that are genuinely meaningful, the ones that truly support us. It actually outlines 4 key reasons why we form relationships: for love and companionship, for emotional support, for a sense of connection and identity, and for networking and, accessing resources.
Right. Those are the big ones.
And this leads to the concept of the interpersonal relationship pyramid, which suggests that, we need to consciously evaluate our relationships and, when necessary, kind of declutter and upgrade them. There's even a SUF associated with this, a pyramid cleaning method. It's all about taking a hierarchical approach to your relationships, figuring out, who are your core people.
And it also mentions the difference between like strong ties and weak ties in our network of relationships, right?
Yeah, and it explains their different roles. So strong ties, they provide the, close, reliable support. But weak ties, those more casual connections, the acquaintances, they can actually be surprisingly valuable in terms of, getting new information and even opening up new opportunities, because they connect you to a much broader, more diverse network.
That makes sense. Now, the book also applies this whole minimalism idea to our close relationships. It stresses the importance of setting healthy boundaries and, making sure that the relationship is fostering growth for both people. And then it moves on to a really important topic, letting go of the need for external validation, which I think so many of us struggle with that, right? Like needing approval from others.
Yeah, it's a big one. And the book's argument here is that this constant need for approval, it often stems from a lack of inner security. And, putting too much emphasis on what other people think. It stresses that trying to please everyone is not only impossible, but, it's also completely unnecessary. And that, regardless of what you do, how successful you are, you're bound to face some disapproval at some point. So it's this idea of developing an internal locus of control, where your sense of worth comes from within, not from external validation. And there's a C here too, it's called returning others' evaluations. It's about, consciously choosing to not internalize those external judgments.
To like let it roll off your back.
Exactly. Now, to really spark lasting change in our lives, the book discusses this idea of breaking free from inertia and using the awareness of our own mortality as like a motivator.
Yeah.
It even brings up that famous Steve Jobs quote about how death is like this great clarifier. It strips away everything that's not important.
Wow. Yeah, that's a powerful one.
Right. So it suggests creating a like a personal countdown, maybe using an app like Lifetime or something similar, and even making a bucket list. These things can help us, really connect with the fact that our time is limited and encourage us to prioritize what really matters to us. The book also introduces this ritual for saying goodbye to the past. It involves like acknowledging what happened, creating some distance, finding any positive lessons or value in it, expressing gratitude, and then consciously choosing to look towards the future. There's a story about a woman named Fife who used this process to let go of some past hurts. And the book even suggests, as a side, setting up a dedicated space for intention and mindfulness.
That's a beautiful idea. Okay, so we've covered a lot, but the book ends by talking about adjusting our frequency, like how we can actively connect with happiness. And it points out our brain's tendency to, well, kind of gravitate towards negative thinking.
Right. Our brains are naturally wired to be more alert to potential threats, thanks to evolution. So because of that, we need to consciously work at cultivating more positive emotional states. The book calls this daily frequency tuning. And it even presents this scale of consciousness energy levels ranging from low negative frequencies like apathy, fear, grief, all the way up to, those high positive frequencies like love, joy, peace.
It connects this to that concept of positive attraction, right?
Yeah.
That happiness isn't something you achieve after success, but rather it can actually lead to success.
Exactly. And the book argues that true freedom comes when, your sense of joy and well-being aren't dependent on external circumstances, but are rooted in your internal state. So this daily frequency tuning is presented as being just as important as any other, self-cultivation practice.
I like that. It's like a mental workout.
Exactly. The book also highlights the power of gratitude. It shares examples of how, shifting your perspective from what you lack to what you have can be so powerful. And it suggests keeping a daily gratitude journal as a soul. And finally, it offers some really good guidelines for creating effective positive affirmations, emphasizing the importance of, focusing on the positive, using the present tense, expressing gratitude, having this mindset of mutual benefit, and cultivating joy. And it wraps up by underscoring how changing your core beliefs can actually lead to positive changes in, your reality.
So after this deep dive into Siju, I'm really struck by this idea that true happiness and freedom, they don't come from constantly acquiring more, but from intentionally letting go of, the physical clutter and the mental noise that weigh us down.
Yeah, it's about creating space, right?
Absolutely. And I think what's really cool about this book is that it shows how all these different areas of our lives, the physical, the mental, the relational, they're all deeply connected. When you make positive changes in one area, you often see positive changes in the others.
It's all interconnected.
Exactly. And ultimately, all these insights, they're things that, you, the listener, can start applying right now. We really encourage you to take some time to reflect on what we've talked about, and maybe consider incorporating some of those practices into your own life. I think it could be a really powerful step towards, greater clarity, more joy, and a deeper sense of purpose.
So now that you've, explored the power of wanting less, think about this. What's one area of your life, your physical space, your mental habits, your relationships, that feels most ready for its own deep dive, its own decluttering session? Or thinking back to that idea of spiritual entropy, what's one small practice you could start today? Just one small thing to cultivate a little more inner order and resilience.
Those are great questions. And thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive into Kamishoy. We hope it's given you some valuable tools and insights for creating a lighter, happier, and more free life.